Usually I am here on a Monday. This week I was here on Monday, but I'm back again with you live today on a Thursday. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. The reason that we're here on a Thursday is because a week ago Monday, when we tried to go live, when my guest, who you'll meet in a second, was joining me, it wouldn't work. We figured out later it's because one of the places, if you don't know this, one of the places that we're simulcasting is to Facebook. And Facebook was down, so nothing wanted to work. So we're so glad. I'm so glad to be with you today. Let me get us started by asking you this question. How many hours do you work each week? And how do you feel on Friday afternoon? How do you feel on Monday morning? Would you like to work fewer hours and get better results in all parts of your life? Let me ask you that again. Would you like to work fewer hours and get better results in all parts of your life? Well, if so, stay tuned. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. You can get all future live episodes, including this ones just like this. If you will interact with us on our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, you can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. But if you're here with us live, I hope that you'll just join us. Act like you're joining us for a cup of coffee. You can't actually interact with us verbally, but you can in the comments. So if you've got a question, ask it. If you've got a comment, share it, because that will make for a better conversation between my guest and I, and it will make a better podcast episode too. Today's episode is brought to you by the Remarkable Master Class. Each month, we release a new skill in an advanced master class format designed to help you become the remarkable leader and human you were born to be. Details on how to get on board for a specific skill or get discounts each month can be found at remarkablemasterclass.com. And with that, it's time to introduce my guest. I'm going to get him in here. His name is Joe Sanok. There he is. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Kevin.
Let me introduce him officially, everybody, and then we'll dive in. Joe Sanok is the author of the brand new book. Came out last week as we're doing this live. Thursday is the new Friday. How to work fewer hours, make more money, and spend more time doing what you want. It examines how a 4-day work week boosts creativity and productivity. He is the host of, I lost my line. He has been featured on Forbes, Good Magazine, and the Smart Passive Income podcast. He's the host of the popular Practice of the Practice podcast, which is recognized as one of the top 50 podcasts worldwide with over 100,000 downloads each month. So let me just tell you, that's a bunch. Best-selling authors, experts, scholars, and business leaders are featured and interviewed in the 550 plus podcasts he's done over the last 6 years. Today, we're flipping the mic and we're putting Joe in the guest chair. Joe, welcome.
Kevin, I'm so excited to be here.
Man, I haven't stumbled over my words that much in a long time. It's like the anticipation, because we chatted last week but couldn't actually go live. So I've especially been looking forward to us having this conversation. We actually have a number of things in common, which we probably don't have time to dive into. But instead, I want to start with a question I often ask my guests, which is a little bit about your backstory, right? So tell us a little bit about your journey, Joe. As you get ready to do that, everybody who's here live, again, if you've got questions, you've got comments, you need to share them. We'll share them with everybody else. We hope you'll do that. Joe, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yes, I have a pretty traditional journey for therapists and counselors where I did undergrad school, then took a year off to travel around the world and just fall in love with learning again. Then did graduate school and went into the nonprofit world, community mental health world for a long time. Really enjoyed working with angry teenagers. That was my jam. I just thought they were the most fun to work with. And then eventually I got a job at a community college and worked there for about 5 years while I was building a side counseling business, and really started that counseling business as a way to pay off student loan debt. That if I could work a couple hours, a week, then pay an extra $1,000 a month off in student loan debt. And that practice just kept growing and growing, and I had more clients than I knew what to do with. So I hired some 1099 contractors and then hired more. And this side gig quickly became my main gig, and I left my full-time job in 2015. But while I was doing that, I also was documenting that through the Practice of the Practice podcast that you referenced, and really went into it as a co-learner because I had 0 business classes in college. I had a lot of psych classes. I know a lot about the mind and human behavior, but actually knowing how to do marketing and SEO, that felt like a slimy world to me. And so when I started to learn that, you know what, when you have a great product like counseling that you can stand behind, it doesn't have to be slimy. When you actually believe in what you're selling and what you're trying to get out there, it's a lot easier. So left that full-time job in 2015, but sold my counseling practice in 2019, and now have just done the podcast and consulting through Practice the Practice with our team there. Built out a team of 8 in South Africa. We have 5 sound engineers in Michigan. Then we have 4 other consultants and a few other support staff. So we've built almost a 20-person team now to support therapists in private practice, and also people that are leaving practice that want to start podcasts and become influencers outside of that space.
There you go, everybody. So if you want to start a podcast, you told me that, Joe, when we were in the green room. That sounds so fancy. When we were in the green room before we went live, and there's nothing green, but you used that word. I started to be a co-learner, and I love that. I just love that. So this book is called Thursday is the New Friday. So you talk early in the book about something that I think is really useful as background, because there are things that we take as like givens, things as facts, right? So give us the quick version of how did we end up with 7 days a week, 40 hours weeks, and 9 to 5 workday. Like there's more there than we can take all that. But like all of those are things that like, okay, a week is 7 days and there's 40 hours of work a week and it's 9 to 5, like how did that all come to pass? And how did that become like locked into our brains?
Yeah, I mean, for us to deconstruct anything, we have to understand if that thing is solid or if it's a little bit shaky. And so for me, in entering this conversation, I wanted to know, like, what of these things is solid and what's shaky? And so we actually have to go back several thousand years to the Babylonians. The Babylonians made up the 7-day week. They looked up into the sky and they saw the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and then they looked down and saw the earth. They said, let's have 7 days. The Romans actually had 10 days. The Egyptians had 8 days. So let's just start with, in nature, there's nothing that points to a 7-day week. We just as easily could have had a 5-day week and 73 weeks a year. Actually, just about 200 years ago, the Russians tried that. They tried a 5-day week. And so this is not something that's super solid, even just the week as we know it. So fast forward to the late 1800s, early 1900s. The average person was working 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. They had a farmer's schedule, whether or not they were a farmer. So then in 1926, when Henry Ford says, you know what, across Ford, we are going to switch to the 40-hour work week. That was a huge step for human evolution, for business evolution. But it was honestly to sell more cars to Ford employees. He knew people wouldn't buy a car to get to work faster. But if they had something that was, actually, got them around faster on the weekend, they'd buy that. And it worked. So less than 100 years ago, this 40-hour work week starts. And so if you just think about it, like even just last night, I was talking to my father. He was in the first generation as a baby boomer to be raised by people that thought like the industrialists. They were the first generation to experience the 40-hour work week as kids. And so this thing that we think is so old is just a couple generations old. So now let's fast forward to the 80s and 90s, and we see the rise of casual Fridays. We see that instead of having a baby shower with work people on the weekend, we start having them on Fridays where everyone brings in cupcakes. We do cheesy team building activities on Fridays. Fridays become this day that's a half-worked day. I like to say that Friday's been having an affair with the weekend for a really long time. Let's just call it what it is. And so we see that start to really dismantle, where the industrialist model of people being machines that we can just plug in starts to fall apart. And then the pandemic of 2020 and 2021 hits. And we all globally start to ask ourselves, why do we work this way? Do we have to work this way? All the boxes we thought we were in are completely thrown out. So we see now the great resignation happening because people are seeing, I don't have to work this way. I work for an industrialist. They just want me to sit in a chair for 40 hours a week. I can do better than that. And so we see this massive shift happening right now into something that's beyond what the industrialists gave us.
Yeah, so you've said that phrase that I just put on the screen there a couple of times now, and I'd like you to you've largely talked to it here, but unpack that a little bit more, because that's the phrase, an industrialist mentality, for those who are listening only, that I think frames part of the big idea of the book. So talk about that just a little bit more.
Yeah, so what the Industrialists gave us was completely needed at the time. Like any step in evolution, we can say thank you for that. And we can also say we've outgrown that. And so to look back and say what was needed in the early 1900s, sure, people needed to work less. Sure, we needed automations. We needed assembly lines. We needed to address large problems of the world and systematize things. That was a huge step for human evolution. And we also have realized we aren't just machines. And when we have a staff member and we hire them and we give them their bullet points, and here's the blueprint of who you are in your job role, the only way to get out of this job role is to become a supervisor, which you might just hate. That's the only way for you to make more money here. We know that that doesn't work. We know that when there's that 5-step book to be more productive, and it's just this prescription model, for some people that doesn't work. And so we're seeing a shift where, yes, parts of that are helpful. It's helpful to have that prescription model book. It's also helpful to have the other side of books where it's this woo-woo book that says, manifest it to the universe, put it on a vision board, and then hope you get that trip to Hawaii, but don't do any work. So both these sides have truths to them, and we can also say they also fall short. And so that's where the new version of books and teachings is more of an evolutionary model, where we're saying that we want to get smarter over time. We want to adapt over time. We want to evolve our businesses and our job roles. And so we see this new model emerging in how people hire and train staff, how they allow their staff to level up and adapt and change within the business without having to just apply for a new position. And there's tons of ways that we talk about that in the book, how the shift is happening away from that industrialist model of people are just machines we plug in and actually evolving into something else.
Right. So, okay. So some people are watching or listening and they're saying, okay, Joe, what are you really saying here? Man, are you saying we should have a 4-day work week? Like, is that what you're saying? Like, none of us should work on Friday anymore? Is that what you're saying?
Well, similar to the industrialists, we want a blueprint that puts everybody in a box. What I'm saying is that there are principles and neuroscience that we can draw from that points to that a 4-day work week for most people will make them more creative and more productive. And we also need to experiment. That's the big shift into this evolutionary model of business, is that we need to experiment, adapt, and see how that fits for individual roles. So take an IT team at a bank. They can't just say, sorry, you're locked out of your password on Friday morning. You can't get into your bank account until Monday. Like, of course, that's not going to work. That's ridiculous. So that team is going to have to look at, well, how do we make sure that we reduce our hours and we're adaptable and changeable? I think about Kalamazoo Valley Community College, who I spotlight in the book. They're an amazing case study. This guy, Ted Forrester, he's an HVAC guy, so he understands heating and cooling system, regular blue collar guy. He started to look at the systems at Kalamazoo Valley Community College in Southwest Michigan. And he saw that, on Fridays in the summer, there were very few students on campus. So he went to the roof every single Friday through a whole summer and took a picture of an empty parking lot. Just Friday after Friday, takes pictures. Then there's a board meeting in the fall that he's invited to speak at about what they can do to kind of do some cost savings. He shows all these pictures. He's like, this is what it looks like every Friday throughout the summer. And then he says, here's what it looks like in the fall. Here's how much it cost us to air condition empty buildings in the summertime. And the board said, what do you think that we should do? And he pulls a USB drive out. He has a full PowerPoint ready to go. And he walks through why the 4-day work week for Kalamazoo Valley Community College will save them a bunch of money. So they switched about 5 years ago to a 4-day work week in the summertime. Now, initially it was only to just save AC costs. But what they did is they switched from a 40-hour week to a 36-hour. HR, quote, donated the last 4 hours. People could flex their schedules on Monday through Thursday. And so now we see that people are able to do work at later times, come in earlier. Student success goes up because they're able to come in when their hours actually align. I mean, if someone, has to work from 7 till 4, and then they can come in at 5:30 after they have their kids, that's great for academic advising. That's great for admissions. They also saw the health outcomes went up. As well, they saw that they retained people better. I mean, Michigan snows like 10 months a year. And so the 2 months of summer that we get.
It does not.
I live here. It's cold a lot. but it's freezing here. So when we get summer, it's like we put up with winter. And to then have a 4-day work week when so many other places have a 5-day, that's a huge selling point for people to stay there. And they've saved over $2.5 million in air conditioning costs. And so we see
just in that one area,
just in that one summer. Yeah. And so you just think about these innovative solutions in very traditional, like a community college is a very traditional type of company or institution.
Right.
And so we see that when you're innovative, when you do experiments, when you adjust and change over time, you realize you're not going to nail it the first time. That's where we actually see companies do a better job at implementing the 4-day work week.
So you mentioned a minute ago, you mentioned two things. You mentioned the pandemic, which you wouldn't have had to mention for us to think about. And you also mentioned the Great Resignation, right? So connected to those 2 points, why is now, that's what I mean by now, why is now a good time to question this, to think about this? Why now?
Yeah. So we have a window of opportunity right now as we look forward. We have massive challenges that are going to hit humanity in the next 50 years. So think about global warming, global poverty, future pandemics. Who knows what's going to hit us? We don't know what kind of mystery things are going to hit humanity. And do we think that having a stressed out and maxed out humanity is going to give us the best results to address those challenges? Or will a more creative, more productive, more on point humanity allow us to then run full tilt when we need to? Because when I look back to 2019 pre-pandemic, is that the best that we can do as humanity? Like, is that the pinnacle of humanity, that we were great at everything? No, we were stressed out. We were maxed out. Our health outcomes were terrible. A 30-year study was looking at adults' sleep, and we were underslept. We were, over sick. There were so many things that were wrong with us. Of course, we're not going to be at our best to address the pandemic. Now, moving forward, we can do better. We have this window of opportunity where we can say, let's reinvent society in the way that's more healthy, but that also gives us better health outcomes based on the research.
I love that. I really do. So there are a lot of people that are listening to this, whenever it is, right? When this comes out in a couple of months, Joe, on the podcast, when more people will see it, or people that are with us now, they're saying, man, I like this. And I'm going to go get a copy of Joe's book. Thursday is the new Friday. And you can find that at wherever fine books are sold. So people are going to do that, and they're going to say, okay, this is awesome, but I'm not the CEO, Joe. I'm not the HVAC guy at Kalamazoo Valley Community College. And how do I convince my boss that we ought to do this?
Yeah, so I think we want to start with first identifying, is your supervisor an industrialist or not? To just start this conversation is a little bit risky. To say, I read this book or I heard this podcast, and I really would like to explore this idea with you, not just for me, but for our team, to experiment and see if a 4-day work week could work for us. You're going to get a pretty quick sense as to whether you're working for an industrialist or not. Right now, supervisors want to keep their employees because it's so hard to replace you right now. So you are in a great bargaining position. And if you can show that the outcomes are better than what is happening right now, that makes that supervisor look awesome. That makes them look like an innovator as well. And so you want to go from the mindset of saying, I want us to do even better. And I want to make sure that you are in the loop and you're never backed into a corner where you don't have the information you need to show that this is a smart decision for the company to test out. So that initial conversation is going to reveal a lot as to whether or not you're working for an industrialist or not. And if you are, that's a different conversation to say, do I want to work here anymore? Do I want to work for someone that's not going to adapt and change with the times, or at least experiment to see if it could work? Now, assuming you have someone that's at least open to it, so you first have that conversation. The next step is you want to get together a group of people that have the same job role. And so 3 to 6 people, you're looking at small teams. So if there's a larger team of 12 or 20, you want to break those up into smaller groups of 3 to 6. And so why 3 to 6? Because you want to be able to create a culture within that small group that can be sustained and that there's quick communication within that group. So you have that group. The first conversation you're going to have is, what kind of boundaries are we going to have around our team's time outside of the office? So are we never checking email after 5, or are we never checking email or even talking to each other on Fridays? Or do we need to have some exceptions? It's going to change based on the team. And it's only an experiment.
And the nature of the work, right?
Yeah.
And how rigid it was before, like 100 things. That's what I love about some questions. And I want to get more at this sort of flexibility before we're done, but go ahead.
Yeah. And so you're going to have a 2 to 3 month experiment. You don't want it less than 2 months because you want to be able to go through some iterations of this and to see what kind of problems emerge. And you also don't want to do it too long and make it feel like it's a long-term commitment. So you're looking at 2 to 3 months for this experiment. And then the next question that you're going to address as a team is, what are the KPIs, the key performance indicators of this team that we already are held accountable for? We're not starting from scratch. We're just saying, okay, you're a sales team. Sales numbers, like, we already are judged on that. Or, maybe it's customer satisfaction, maybe it's addressing certain problems within the company, figuring out the 1 or 2 major KPIs of your job roles. And then how are you going to track those? So then you're going to enact the study. And the first day of each week, you're going to have a stand-up meeting where you have a quick conversation around, first, how did those boundaries go? Did Jim from accounting send us an email at 9 p.m. on Wednesday, and that was inappropriate and outside of our typical norms? Or maybe Jim from accounting every Wednesday night gets an email at 8:30, from the West Coast that he has to forward to us, so we're prepped for Thursday morning. Well, now we need a new norm to say, okay, everyone from 9 to 9:15, check your email and just look at the email from Jim. Don't worry about all the other emails, but we're going to check Jim's email every Wednesday night. Okay, so we're creating a smarter group of norms. We also want to get some qualitative data during that time too. Like, did you get to go to your son's baseball practice for the first time in 2 years? How did that feel? Because then eventually we're going to want to incorporate that into a report. Then we're going to look at the KPIs. Are we up 2%? Are we down 2%? The way that we're tracking it. If we're up, what did we do? If we're down, what are we going to do? And then every month, we're going to do a 360 report of how did it go? And we're looking for kind of the head and heart. So what are the things that happened, the qualitative things, like I got to go to my son's baseball practice. So you're speaking to the emotions, the culture, and then the hard numbers, because there's going to be analytical people that want to see, like, is this actually better for the bottom line? Right. And then at the end of your 2 to 3 months, you're going to bring all those 360 reports together and have one report that you can give to your supervisor and to say, here are the recommendations moving forward. We think we should do another study. We think we should enact these things. Here's the lessons learned of pitfalls we should avoid. Here's the biggest things that will absolutely not work. It may be that there's aspects of it that you say, we thought we could do 4 days. We could do 4.5, but it's not realistic to do 4. So you're giving that data so that if your supervisor ever is backed into a corner, said, I can't believe you did this for your team, they can actually then say, no, here's the data, here's the report.
Here's the data. Yeah. So a lot of this does too depend on the nature of the larger organization, right? If we're at the community college in Kalamazoo, which isn't super small, but it's not massive. I mean, I'll stay in the same part of the world. It's not Upjohn, right? It's not Whirlpool. And so, we've got to think, you've got to take all of Joe's ideas here and put them into the context of your organization. But I think it's also, Joe is super solid. It's one of the things I love about the book. You hinted at something else as well when you said, well, maybe we can't get to 4, or maybe we can get to 4.5. And so you've really been answering this question, how do we start? How do we start in terms of, as a team or as an organization? And you've planted the flag in the ground that says, hey, I think we should try to be getting to 4 days. But really in the book, you're saying we need to rethink it all. And maybe it is 4.5, or maybe it's something else. So what are your thoughts about, for folks that are trying it, what is your experience telling you about how many are getting to 4 days? Are they doing 4 10s? Or, are they doing 40? Or are they doing 32? Or are they doing 36 hours? And then lastly, how long is it taking them to get from where they were to where they end up?
Yeah. So let's start kind of big picture, the flow of the modality. And so we're starting first internally with our internal inclinations. And so we walk through the 3 major internal inclinations, because so often we get these productivity books and we just start with the productivity without ever doing the inner work. And if you don't do the inner work, you're not going to work on the right stuff. And so you do the inner work, then we step into slowing down. And then that slowing down optimizes the brain to then go absolutely kill it. And so usually how people act is they are reacting to their previous week when they enter into the weekend. So I had a stressed out week. I'm going to oversleep, overdrink, over whatever on the weekend to just try to recuperate from it. And then I'm going to go back to work. And I was so busy with the family on the weekend, it feels like work is actually a break from my family. Like, most people are reacting and just letting things come at them instead of being intentional and saying, how do I make sure this weekend, whether it's 2 days or 1 day or 3 days, how do I make sure that is the best, most comprehensive to set me up for success in the next week? So that's the big picture. Now, to your question of how many people are doing 40.
Can I just stop you right there?
Sure.
Because if people just did that, forget the number of hours I know that's the context of the book, but forget the number of hours that we're working. If we would just do that, figure out what we need to do to refresh and recharge and really clarify that one thing, that would make a huge difference for us individually.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
I'm talking to the counselor here, but to me, that is a huge piece of this.
And I think the one step, like when a lot of times people will say, what's the small thing that I can actually do now? I don't know if I can get to the full 3 days. I often recommend people add one and remove one from their weekend. And so what you're doing is you're adding in one thing that is going to give you a stronger return on investment for that action than it should. So maybe there's a novel that's been sitting on your nightstand for months. It's not a business book. It's just something fun to read. And you haven't given yourself emotional permission to go read that book. Maybe reading that for 2 hours while drinking green tea on a Saturday morning is going to be the highlight of your weekend. Maybe going for a hike instead of doing laundry. Maybe having coffee with a friend that every time you see them, you're like, we should get together, but you never get together. Maybe adding one of those things is an experiment that you can do. And again, it's an experiment because we're seeing, did it give me that boost? I read for 2 hours. I actually didn't like it that much. That green tea was gross and the book was terrible. Okay, great. You learned something about yourself. Reading on a Saturday morning is not going to get you all excited. And then we get to remove something from the weekend in the same way as an experiment. Maybe you do have coffee plans with a friend, and every time you leave that coffee, you feel like trash. It's a toxic friend that makes you feel like junk. I give you permission to cancel that. You don't have to hang out with toxic people anymore. You're past that. Maybe your lawn, you don't want to rake it, and you hire the neighbor kid to blow it and rake it because you're just like, I don't want to spend my weekend doing that. Or maybe you have your groceries delivered. So you're removing these things from your schedule to, again, experiment and see. Maybe you'll find that actually, raking the leaves was kind of meditative and you missed it. And you're like, oh, that didn't make me feel as good to have the neighbor kid do that as I thought. Or maybe you're going to say, thank goodness I don't have to work on my leaves anymore. That's amazing. And so we're experimenting. And so in the same way we're experimenting on our weekends, we want to start to experiment with our work week. And so I remember the first summer that I was free from working at the community college I was at, where I went totally full time, summer of 2015, I did an experiment where I said, I'm going to work 4 days a week and I'm just going to see for the summer what happens. My business won't completely fall apart, just working one less day a week throughout the summer. June of 2015 was my best financial month to date at that time. July was better than June and August was better than July. So then that became a permanent part of my schedule because I was working on the best things in those 4 days, not all of the things. I was dropping the ball in the areas I should have been dropping the ball. I shouldn't have been the one in my office taking out the trash and vacuuming and getting the recycling and doing all that. Why was I doing all that? Like, that's not the highest use of my energy and my time. And so then as I do the higher end things, that brings in the higher end business. And so to your final question of, is it 32 versus 40? I think having that experimental model is really important, but the Iceland study that just came out a couple months ago, it's a multi-year study, largest study of the 4-day work week to date, 2,500 people in multiple disciplines. They found that they were more productive with a 32-hour week than the 40-hour week people. They had better health outcomes as well. They had higher happiness. So basically those last 8 hours of work were a hobby. They didn't move the needle forward one bit. If anything, because the 32 hours was more productive, it actually moved the needle backwards. That's like saying, I'm going to do a 5-mile hike, but you know what? It's only going to, for my body and the exercise, only count as 4 miles. Like, why would we do an extra 8 hours if it's not going to do anything?
Well, you talked in the book briefly about one of my favorite laws, which is Parkinson's law. So just talk about that briefly, because it talks directly, Joe, to that point.
Yeah. So Parkinson's law, part of the law is that work expands to time given to it, which is the part that we often hear. The other side that Parkinson talked about is how organizations tend to bloat over time. And so he looked over the years at the British Navy and how basically when you added any sort of thing to it, it was near impossible to pull it back out. And so the red tape kept building up. And so when we start to contrast our schedules, it forces us to work fewer hours and to get more done in that period of time. But it also forces us to cut that bloating out of our company because we then have added all these systems upon systems. But wait, Joe's not doing that anymore. Should we do that? Maybe we need to have a completely new system and just get rid of this entire piece of how Joe used to do it. And so it gives you a chance then to clean up the processes within the business because that main person is no longer going to be the linchpin that slows things down.
So I told you before we started, Joe, that I had more questions written down for you than I had for anyone I could remember. I didn't put them all on my little list where I could pop them up here on the lower third. I absolutely know that we could do a whole other show, right? And I'm not in this moment inviting you back and you're saying, Kevin, I don't want to come back. That could be, but I realized that we could have a whole, we really focused this largely on us as individuals. And I have no problem with that, because as leaders, we are human beings too. And we need to think about that. We are workers as we are leaders. And all of that is completely true. And yet, before we start to go around the corner into the final turn here, sort of give us a couple of thoughts with our leader hat on now. I mean, we've talked about that a little bit in terms of some systems and a little bit about what we could do, in the organization. But any other sort of final thoughts for us at a high level for organizations or for leaders that are thinking, well, what could we do here?
Yeah, one pivotal conversation that I would say every leader needs to have with their direct team that's reporting to them is asking them 3 questions. First question is, what are you doing right now that you absolutely love? Second, what are you doing right now in your role that you absolutely hate and wish you could take off of your plate? And third, how do you want to grow or evolve or get extra training in a different area? So often we have these C-suite people, or we've got mid-level managers, or wherever we're at in an organization, and we don't think of the people that report to us as being able to evolve. And then they feel stuck and they leave those job roles. And then it takes us 6 months to hire someone, get them trained, get them back up to that same productivity. I have my chief marketing officer. I've asked her this question for the last 7 years that she's been with the organization. She has stuck with me. She started with just doing design. She was doing these quote cards for Instagram and for different things online. And then she said, what if we made a magazine, a digital magazine? I'm like, that's great. I have no idea how to do that. Let's get you some training. So we did that. And then she said, I'm really sick of doing the show notes and the podcasting. So she then hired the new person. She then trained the new person. She created the systems, because if she wants that off her plate, who's most motivated to take it off her plate? She is.
She is.
Right. So I'm not going to come in and make more work for myself. We're taking that work off of your plate so you can be happier. So then she's most motivated to do the training. She knows that if this person ends up leaving, it's probably going to go back on her plate until we can hire someone else new. And so then she's motivated to move that off her plate. Then the next year she said, I want some video editing training. I want us to really amp up our YouTube game and all of that. And so she got some amazing training, and we were making these amazing videos, but the numbers weren't where we thought they should be. So then she wanted to go through a YouTube marketing training. So she went through that. So over time, she knows she can shift, adjust, and change. Even if you're in a traditional organization, say you're the CEO and you're talking to your C-suite, to be able to have conversations with the CFO and say, what do you hate about your job? If you can't have that level of intimacy and discussion with your leadership, you're not a good leader. You need to be able to hear what they hate about their job, because you want to retain them. Say there's 2 reports that they absolutely hate doing. How can we take that off of their plate so that they can have a clear mind to be the best leader they can be? Because if there's people that have these elements of their jobs they absolutely hate, we need to try our best to take that off of their plates, or at least give them some support so that they can do that highest level thinking.
Yeah, we could have a whole show on that point right there about what do you do then? And because sometimes it's, we don't have time for that. Rebecca has this question. I left it up there. I put it up there earlier. I left it up there because I think it goes to a question that sometimes you're going to hear from leaders. Well, and I don't know exactly where Rebecca's coming from with the question, but the question is, okay, but isn't working a 32-hour week a slippery slope? I'm betting you've heard that question.
I have.
So speak to that briefly, and then we're gonna bring this home.
Yeah, I'll start. Historically, we've done this. The conversations that were happening in 1926, when they were switching from a 10 to 14 hour day, 6 to 7 days a week, to a 40-hour work week, were that exact question. Isn't that a slippery slope that 40 hours, then people are going to want to be lazy and stay at home? We know that deep down, people want to do good work. People want to impact the world. They don't want to just go to a job to get a paycheck. We know that meaning, passion, all of those are elements of why people stay in a job. And so I would actually argue that moving to a 32-hour work week is not a slippery slope, because it's aligning our bodies more with what we need. And people are already wasting that 8 hours throughout the week. If you actually looked at the productivity of most teams, that extra 8 hours is being stolen from the company in one way or another. And so to give people that 8 hours and just say, listen, we're going to run full tilt. Here are the KPIs we have for the team that we want to hit. If we can't, we're going to go back to a 40-hour work week. You don't think people are going to run full tilt towards that 32 hours then? Of course they are, because they know they get Fridays off. And so it's moving from just saying, okay, 40 hours butts in the chair, that's the best KPI we can have, versus let's actually have something that means something, have it measurable, and say, let's run full tilt. Let's figure out how to do this as a team. Then you all can have Friday off.
Well, and of course that KPI of butts in the seats has been obliterated over the last 24 months, and many leaders struggled with that early on, big time, right? Like, how do I know if they're working? They're not. I can't see them. So I ask this question all the time, Joe. For no one is it more like apropos than to ask you, because heck, you're only working 4 days a week. What do you do for fun, Joe?
Oh man, so I am a single dad of two amazing daughters that are 7 and 10. So I almost always have glitter in my hair. So playing with them, creating adventures with them. We enjoy going stand-up paddleboarding, being outside. I just love being a dad and figuring out what to do with them. That's fun. I'm a curler. So I go curling, and I find that to be just hilarious and a lot more work than I expected. I've got an amazing group of friends, and we will host unique outdoor parties during the pandemic to have it be safe, but then also to somewhat socialize with each other as well. So I live in a fun neighborhood of people that enjoy each other, that have kids that all play together, and socialization, and also meditation. I do a lot of meditating as well. So I kind of have both sides of it.
Perfect. So we got another question. One more question. Rebecca has a follow-up, and I'm gonna ask it. I'm reading it for the first time. I love the idea, but just curious if some would take advantage if they are not too committed in the first place in their roles. So I think
great.
Kind of answered that, but you want to comment a little bit more on that?
No, I would say that the 32-hour work week is not going to be the thing that makes them take advantage of it. I mean, they're probably already taking advantage of it within a 40-hour work week. And so if anything, it would make them more accountable, because now instead of just saying you have to be here for 40 hours, it would be in your job role, here's how we're going to define your success. And if in 32 hours you can't do this, sure, maybe the rest of us work 32 hours and you work 40 if you can't get it done. I've had a fully remote team since the very beginning. I have 8 staff in South Africa. I've never met any of them in person. My highest level leadership, I've never physically met in person. And so having weekly phone calls with her about where we're at with things, having a Trello board to keep track of all the projects. If she's not getting projects done, then we're going to have a conversation. If she is getting projects done, we're not. And so that idea of having feedback be a part of the feedback loop, instead of when you're in trouble, to have it be project and outcome based more than time based, to me is the bigger shift. For if someone's that person that's going to take advantage, they're going to do that with 40 hours anyway.
Agreed. The other question that I ask everybody, Joe, everybody that's here, what are you reading these days, Joe?
Yeah, I have really loved Michael Singer's work, The Untethered Soul. He also has a course called Living from a Place of Surrender. For me, it's so important to do that personal work first, and as part of our journey, rather than only do the business work. And so for me, Michael Singer's work has really helped me with just allowing difficult emotions to move through me, not attaching to outcomes that I need to have, or avoiding pain that I'm scared of, to really allow that negative and positive energy to flow through me. And it's just taught me to, I think, move through life with more of a let's see how it unfolds approach, rather than this high achiever, I need to make everything in the world align with my own expectations.
So we've been talking with Joe Sanok about his new book, Thursday is the New Friday. And because right now there's some cool stuff you're doing related to the release of the book. So I want to give you a chance to talk about that. I'll put the book site up here. And then after you do that, if there's anything else you want to say about how people can connect with you, about your podcast, whatever, here's your chance, my friend.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for having me. So we're doing all sorts of different book deals over at thursdaysthenewfriday.com. If you buy 5, you get access to our digital course called Killing It Camp, which walks you through all sorts of skills to grow your business. And so you'll get all the recordings from that. It's over 30 hours of content, and all you have to do is buy 5 books. If you want to be a part of our mastermind group, the Thursdays the New Friday mastermind group, you'll just buy 10 books, and then you get access to top leaders and other people that are going to be within that. Plenty of other podcasters, influencers, and business leaders are going to be in that Thursday is the New Friday mastermind group. And if you buy 25 or more, then we can talk about a speaking engagement, keynotes, things like that for your company. And so all of those details are at thursdaysthenewfriday.com. It doesn't matter where you buy it. You can buy it from your local bookstore, Amazon, Audible. You can buy digital copies for your team. Nissan Infinity Canada bought 200 to give out to their team. And so you can just buy it wherever you want and submit your receipt over at thursdayisthenewfriday.com. And everything that I do from keynote speaking and writing is over at joesanok.com. That's where we have people reporting out experiments that they're trying within their own businesses as they enact Thursday is the new Friday. So I would say that as we look forward, I just want to go back to that point that we are the post-pandemic generation. We have a window of time right now where we get to reshape things. We get to rethink things, that we are most open for a window of time to say, do we want to go back to 2019? Is that the best that we can do? Or do the challenges ahead of us need something different? Do they need us to have more energy, more productivity, more creativity, to have innovation? I believe we do. I believe the challenges ahead of us, known and unknown, need our best selves. And moving into a Thursday is the new Friday mindset is going to be part of that equation to help us get there.
All right, now everybody, I have a question for you. It's a question I ask you every week here. Now what? You got a whole bunch of ideas from Joe. You got maybe some things to ponder from Joe, but if you don't take any action, it really doesn't make any difference. So my challenge to you is to think, what from this last 40 minutes or so are you going to take action on or do something about, along with, of course, buying a copy of the book? But what are you going to do as a first step, as a next step, whether that's with your leader hat on, whether that's with your team member hat on, whether that's with your human hat on? I encourage you to think about all of those things. Joe, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Kevin, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Everybody, we're here every week, so I hope you come back, right? So whether it's at the Facebook group, remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook, whether it's at the LinkedIn group, remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn, or whether it's wherever you watch your podcast. Hope you do that. Hope you come back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.